Hi, I'm Brian Lawrence, your host, and I'm here with Gabriela Lopez, who's the president of the San Francisco Unified School District. Welcome, Gabriela. Thanks so much for taking some time and hanging out with me. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent. And so you are the youngest person elected in San Francisco, and now you're chairing the school board. How did that come about? Tell me a little bit. You've been on the school board for a couple years now, and but what prompted you to run, and how did you end up as president of San Francisco School District?
Yeah. So it dates back quite a few years when my work started, obviously, in the classroom. I was a classroom teacher in Los Angeles. It's where I'm from. And a lot of my work began, or at least the exploration began when I was in LAUSD schools. And I realized there was a lot of in a feeling of a sense of belonging in my own school. And I saw that in my teachers. And a big part of me felt how amazing it would be to be that person that my students could see in this role. So that sort of launched my interest in education and teaching and really exploring what we do talk about, what we don't talk about. And a lot of my journey in undergrad and grad school was all education. So once I graduated from UCLA, I then moved to San Francisco. I started working in SFUSD immediately and fell in love with my school community. And through that, found a home with a Bay Area group called Teachers for Social Justice. And I've actually learned about their work when I was in Los Angeles, and a lot of what we do now, I'm a core member, and what we do now is provide these resources for educators across the Bay Area and really across the state and the country through other teacher networks, about ways to teach social justice thoughtfully and included with other people who are like-minded, who really want to challenge these ideas. We're often alone in our school spaces when working through this kind of work. So that felt like a space that I needed for a long time. And a part of their work, it was involved in political campaigns and school board races. Um, they've they've built a lot of experience around how to get educators in this role. And I'm sure you know that a lot of the time we have school board members who haven't been in the classroom or who have ideas about schooling that may be helpful, but in practice it's not. So my colleagues asked me to run, and my initial reaction was absolutely not, like
Right.
absolutely no way that could happen. I was at the time I was 27, and we sat with it more. I talked with my family and friends and found more support. And this was actually the election after Trump was elected.
Right.
So there was also a rise in candidates. There were so many amazing people who didn't see themselves running and then found that this is the time and the time to do it. So somehow I was convinced to, and it was a pretty packed race. It was bringing someone like me who's honestly not politically aspirational in any way, but really wants to support the schooling system and the decision-making spaces that'll reflect what we want to see in the classroom. And those ideas didn't sit well with people. So I had very little support during the campaign. We weren't like a big money driven campaign. We probably raised the least amount out of the majority of candidates. There were like 30 candidates in that race for 3 seats. It was
Yeah.
very interesting experience. But as far as the political institutional support, our campaign didn't have any. So it was, I was a full-time teacher, the only candidate that was working during that race as a teacher. And we would campaign before school, after school, on weekends. I would go door to door. We hit about 400 precincts out of the 700 in San Francisco, just really talking to people face to face. And that message resonated, and we wound up in second place. And I remember the first round of results when I saw it, I just was in shock.
Yeah.
Um, and knew I'm going to need we're going to need about a couple of weeks to actually see what the results show. But throughout,
Right.
the trend was the same. And it was really just a time where voters in San Francisco and across the country wanted change.
Well, I struggle to find positives of the Trump presidency. I think one of the few is that, people like you, that there's a whole new generation of people who are stepping up and running. But since you're, at least in Mount Diablo, and I presume in San Francisco, if you're a employee, if you're a teacher of the school district, you can't continue. So does that mean you're no longer a teacher in SFUSD?
That's right. It was actually one of the hardest parts of this, and one of those things that we knew in the back of our mind, especially my students and the families of my students who I grew very close with, that there was a possibility if I won, I would have to leave, and it doesn't align with the school year. So my term starts in January. I had to leave mid-year. So it's many layers of difficulty, of sacrifice. It really doesn't set up a space for people like me with my background for working families to want to give that up. So I had to resign. It was a conflict of interest. At one point, I was working in Hayward as a classroom teacher there, because it's also an unpaid position, which is another thing that people forget about school boards. And beginning my term, learning through that work and figuring out how my role as a commissioner, and then balancing a new school district, new classroom, plus the commute was probably one of the hardest moments of my life. It's just like the mental exhaustion that I felt, and disconnect because I lost my family at my other school was really hard. So I made the choice that summer to no longer continue teaching in the classroom and to work work in San Francisco in any space that had to do with education. Because again, that's where my heart is.
That's your passion. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did work at a nonprofit in San Francisco. It was very close to home, and then the pandemic hit, and we were laid off. So
Wow.
it's been an interesting time looking for work as a school board commissioner.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't recognize the sacrifices that it takes for public service. So thank you for that. And, in terms of social justice, there are two topics for San Francisco school district that seem to come to the forefront on those. And the first one is the return of kids to school. And so you're in a situation where Mayor London Breed has come out very strongly and basically denounced your school board and district and said, she and the city attorney were prepared to sue in order to get kids back in school. And just as another piece to that, and I put myself in the category of, hey, I want kids back in school, but I think we all recognize there's a lot of nuance to that. There was an article that just came out that looked at the Bay Area, and basically the school districts in the Bay Area that have returned in person are the whiter, more affluent districts. And there is a real bifurcation there. And so I'm just wondering, where you're at in San Francisco and how you're approaching it, and how it feels to have the mayor and the city attorney suing you.
Well, I think these are the moments when I tap into my own classroom experience. And when I hear, we are seeing all of the sides of it. I'm hearing from parents, I'm hearing from teachers, I'm hearing from students, city leaders, and there's this need to understand all of these perspectives and really try to share why we are in such a difficult position. When I think about my own experience and the genuine fear that teachers have right now, we see the buildings that haven't been supporting our students, that parts of it have been falling apart, that windows have been screwed shut. You see the lack of attention to detail that is so important during this pandemic. And to try to trust a school system, a public school system that has consistently let us down during this process is not an easy thing to do. So we've been studying so much about what we need to see in our schools in order to do it safely. A lot of the educators push for these safety protocols are now mandated by the state. We're seeing it come from the CDC guidelines. Like, these are things that we didn't think about that they've been pushing, because again, we have this background, this understanding that it's asking a number of people who already had a lack of trust in our school systems to come in and risk their lives, from people who aren't in the space. I think that's the other big piece, is majority of our city leaders' own city departments aren't open. They're not coming back in person. They themselves haven't been in teaching spaces or have that understanding or that experience, to know what it means to ask them to return. That's the one piece. And then we really are sitting with the understanding that right now learning is not at all what we want it to be. And how could it be? We're dealing with the pandemic. We're working in this virtual space that even experienced teachers need to work around and learn about and adjust to. So it's been, I think the hardest part is the lack of recognition of what people have done since we shut our doors, to try to support our students and our families as much as possible. It's almost this idea that we're just sitting, teachers are just sitting, like no one's actually working, no one's doing anything. And not only are they going above and beyond to try to adjust to this new learning, that's unfortunately what we have to do. They're also connecting with families, where they're doing home visits. They're trying to drop off materials. They're getting food to their homes. They're doing all of the things that we've done even before we recognize that there are inequities in all of our systems that the pandemic has now revealed. So it's, working through all of that, holding that, and continuing to assure people that we are in fact wanting the same thing and we are in fact working towards it, but it's navigating the actual barriers that we've had even before we were in this position.
So as I understand it, San Francisco School District, the population of San Francisco is right around 50% white, but the San Francisco School District population of white students is, I think, around 15, 16%, something like that. And so disproportionately, it's your students of color who, that is the majority of the school district, and they are, not in school. And these are also many of the communities that are hit hardest by COVID right now, that, families and parents who are frontline workers. And so we see the highest rates. And I guess for me, one of the things I try to balance is the understanding that these are the hardest hit communities. They also have some of the highest distrust of government. And that was, certainly in Hispanic families, that was exacerbated over the last 4 years. We saw that in terms of the number of families even filing for help with food, because they were scared it was some sort of, connected to the government, and that, ICE would come and raid their home. So we have all these things. That concern around vaccination is highest in minority communities. Mm-hmm. And so we have all of these things. And yet one of the things I really worry about is that these are also the families who, those children, have the least access to internet and connectivity and things like that. And we've already have this tremendous learning gap. How do you balance those two things, or how are you thinking about those things? Because there are a lot of complexities there. That's one of the things I struggle with.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of responses, but I do want to start with the one thing that was really wonderful about our school district is our immediate reaction to support families who didn't have access to technology in order to do this learning. And the idea is, we consistently do not mandate something when we don't provide the resources to do it. So we couldn't offer and tell people you need to learn online if you didn't have the Wi-Fi, if you didn't have the gear, if you didn't have all of the items needed to do that. So immediately stepping into that, we were able to provide laptops for any student who needed it, and Wi-Fi for any student who needed it. And there were like so many things that we had to work through with the city support to make sure that that access was strong. On the ground, I led in-person and virtual workshops for families who were using their technology and wanted to understand the platform. So it was also, we're giving you resources, but we're also needing to educate and help you navigate what you're exploring with your child, because now parents are entering into teacher mode. And it's that understanding, it's really showing people, we are hearing that you want support in this area, and we understand that we can't just give you a tool and expect it to be productive and effective. We also have to work through that learning together. So it was one of those moments where I could tap into my educator background, and I could really sit with families, which I've done so many times in the past, to work through the platforms that they're using to support their children at home. And then you start realizing they're really really interesting or basic things that we don't think about when we give a resource, and it could be a barrier for some families. So, each student has an email and password to log on. All of our passwords start with a capital letter. And I worked with a family who didn't know how to capitalize that letter, so they couldn't log in and they couldn't access class. And it was a situation where you have all of the materials necessary, and it could be so frustrating trying to log in because it's still not working. But this in-person connection and this realization that we are like showing them we are here to help you through that exact thing, was so simple, and then that solved their problem. And they catch on so quick, and they're learning with their student. And so it was really wonderful to be able to do that. But it's knowing that this is a need, and it's not just providing what we have to provide as an educational system, but it's also the support that we're giving. And so I saw that happen in our school district. I saw a lot of the work that we implemented early on, as far as how are we reaching out to families and hearing from them directly about their needs. And then, I'm sure you know this too, a lot of a students' direct needs and their families are often outside of our educational system. It's access to food or access to healthcare, safely getting to and from school, housing, like all of the things that if a student is suffering through this, it will impact their learning, no matter how wonderful our lessons are. So then it really started to show we need full city support in all of the areas that an educational system shouldn't hold. And even then, we were feeding students from the start. We've reached now today 5 million meals that we've provided for all of our students. And this is a school system. And you're seeing now we have to tap into all of these other resources that we don't really have access to, that we know our families need in order to support their learning. And it's specific to the families that you were mentioning earlier, who the ones who are most hardest hit. So how do we connect with the city in order to provide these resources, instead of now being divided and being scolded for not being able to do something that is one of the most challenging things we've seen across the country.
Yeah. And I think there's so many great points that you hit on there, and the services, the school district, because we have the same thing in Mount Diablo, that for a while, back in March and April, one of our primary missions became we need to help put food on families' tables. That became a real need. And I guess one of the flip sides is that we know for some students, school is like the safest place that they can go, and it's a support system. It is San Francisco School District, and one of the approaches we took in Mount Diablo was to try and get some small groups of students back on, the ones who need it the most. And frankly, that's like, it's not my kids. I mean, I've recognized, like, I'm very privileged and have a wife who is here supporting my 4 kids. They've got good internet, but it's those other kids. And that was a primary goal. Where is San Francisco School District in that, in terms of trying to get small groups back, or some of those most vulnerable students?
So in all of our planning that's been created from the start, it is focusing on the students who need it the most. It's starting with our youngest learners, and it's starting with our focal populations that we know need more support in person. So that's the focus where we are now, and our buildings are ready to hold it. Our educators are getting ready to come back to be in this space. But even before that, the city of San Francisco launched their community hubs, which was supporting exactly those students, to get them back into a space where they're with people, they're getting support, they're working through the technology, and especially for families who may need to work because they don't have financial assistance during this time in order to survive. So now, like, those are the kinds of relationships that we've seen. If we work together and share our resources, we can serve more students who are, in fact, the hardest hit during this time.
Yeah. And it seems like you made some progress with your teachers union this week, which at the end of the day, I think that's one of the things I've tried to convey to people is we can't open schools without teachers. They're a really important part of it. And there is a teacher shortage in California. And so I at least have thought trying to force teachers back into the classroom when they don't feel it's safe and they haven't been vaccinated seems like a very challenging approach. And I'd rather work with the teachers who do feel comfortable coming back. Where are you at with your teachers union, and what sort of progress are you seeing there?
So that's the greatest piece out of all of this. It's like, we're listening. I spend a lot of my time making sure that people aren't feeling like we are trying to force the situation, because they're, again, like, they are the ones who will be in this space, and they need to feel heard, and so do their needs, in order for us to really ensure that relationship, that trust is there, so that they can come back and comfortably do the work they've set out to do. And thankfully, we've built that. I've spent the last month in my new role really ensuring that we're a school district that is willing and wants to partner with our educators, with all of our labor unions, because they're the ones who are in this space. And so we reached an agreement. And then now there's the work in figuring out what the school day looks like. But ultimately, we know that our buildings they can fit a certain number of students because of the space, because of the way it's set up, because of all of the safety protocols. So once we can see how many students are willing to come back, because we also know not all of our families want to come back until they get a vaccine. How many students are wanting to come back, which school buildings that is their home, can they go to with their same classroom teacher, and get that all figured out. Then we'll really be in a place to return and get all of that planning set.
Do you think you'll have any students back this school year, or do you think it's more a fall thing at this point?
Everything that I've seen, every day we get stronger and faster. I have a lot of hope that by the time we get the testing up and running, which is something that the school district had to do because the city was not supporting us, and then get these assignments ready because we've finalized our work with the teachers, then we can go back. Our buildings are ready to hold students. And again, it'll be focusing on the youngest learners and building out to hold as many students as possible at any given time. And this is, I know there's a lot of floating around with how our school day will look like, but the intention is as much as possible to be like it was all 5 days, right? So that's what we're working through, and really being realistic, because we also understand that there are a number of students we hold. Our classes are not 14 students, they're more than that. So, how do you balance the situation where one classroom, all of the students want to return and they should be in person? Working through those logistics is what we're getting into.
And do you think one of the positives of this is, and there aren't very many, I think we all know that, but that maybe people are starting to have a better understanding of things such as class size and infrastructure, and that people, many of us have been talking about these things for years, and it seems like for some folks they're newly discovering this. What's your take on that?
That's absolutely right. And I think it is an exciting opportunity because that advocacy from community members, from families, parents, other educators, we're going to need it when we reach other moments of inequitable funding in the public school system, or this understanding that a teacher-student ratio should really be lower as much as possible to effectively support every single one of our students. Those kinds of things are now coming to light. And it is what I've been saying from the beginning, it's an opportunity for us to really restructure our educational system to fully support every single student. And that means paras in every classroom. That means bringing down the student ratio. That means fully funding a classroom and the resources needed in order to do that. It means teachers getting planning time and being able to collaborate with other educators. A number of things that when you go through a school day is almost impossible to achieve for one individual teacher with 30 students. And now that I'm seeing this, it really is an exciting time to see how we can incorporate that in our future schooling system and continue to see and have the advocacy that's making it happen. The push that we're seeing right now is really helping us show and highlight what we need for our schools. And I want and hope that that continues.
So at the same time, you've been working to keep kids safe, focus on getting them back to the classroom, doing that safely. You've also tackled the issue as a board around the naming of schools, and that's been quite controversial as well. And so some of the touch points have been around, Senator Dianne Feinstein, Paul Revere, Abraham Lincoln, and this effort to rename some of the schools. One, why did you decide that in the middle of pandemic was time to take that on?
So one thing that is also something we highlighted at the beginning of this year is our three main priorities. They are the school reopening, distance learning, improving distance learning, and our budget stability. Those are the three things that all our eyes and our attention are on. And when the renaming stuff came up, it really was a final vote that didn't happen in boards prior to ours. So this is a resolution that was passed in 2018. And then the committee held the work and they came up with the names, and schools and communities were excited about doing this work and beginning this process, but we never finalized that list. We never officially as a board said, these are the names that will be changed. And we didn't, for me, it was important to not have a school go through this entire process and then we decided to not change one of the names to really ensure the work that they're doing is going towards something. But if we were going to change that, we needed to announce it soon. So I brought it up just to kind of wrap up that work that had been done. And it turned into what it was, this idea that we're focusing on anything but reopening, which of course is not true, that we're focusing on not educating our students, which is still happening. I find it completely disrespectful when people say that we're not learning right now. Like, I understand it's different, but teachers are working so hard to really ensure that learning is happening. Schools are still open. And so much attention was drawn on this. So that really was why it came up. And it's something that I know in our respective communities, people will learn about the process, will learn about what came up, will learn like how to come together and come up with a name that our school communities can be proud of, that can highlight and uplift communities that are normally not uplifted. And that was the spirit of this work. And so it's really unfortunate that it's gotten to where it is, because it's like I've mentioned, it's in no way erasing what we know. This doesn't change the history, and it doesn't change what people have done, but it does give schools an opportunity to highlight something else, highlight someone else, highlight stories, and learn about things that are normally not taught in our schools. And that's what I think is really the beautiful part of this, is that's where we're heading. Really taking in the information that is normally not shown or shared, and showing students that they can see themselves in our schools.
And then how does that translate like over into curriculum? Because I think that, we've seen efforts across California and in our community, and I know in San Francisco, to have a curriculum that's more reflective, that isn't just solely a traditional, very white, very male narrative. where does that kind of fit in? Uh, Ancillary to this piece, or with the renaming, or how do you think about that?
Well, that's absolutely right, and it's something that our curriculum department has been focused on for a really long time. And the way we see it is, even if we're talking about ethnic studies, this is a good example of how this is a great way to incorporate ideals and ideas and people who we normally don't see in our textbooks. The way it's structured is something that we offer mostly in our high school classes, but this is really something that we can stretch and begin early on, starting in pre-K, with just the foundation of this work. And we're already doing it even with the books that we're reading in our elementary schools, middle and high schools are transforming, they're changing, they're beginning to highlight things that we normally don't see. Again, it's helping the students that we serve see themselves in these spaces. And our curriculum is starting to weave that in. It's starting to highlight why it didn't before, why it's important to understand how we got here. And we can do that beginning at the pre-K level and just kind of see a student's educational journey incorporating these ideas throughout their time with us. That way they don't have to wait to college to begin learning about this, which is what happened to me and which is what happened to many people. It's something that we can bring up, we can confront, we can talk about thoughtfully with all of our students.
We did a panel with some of our high school, I think mostly seniors, but our high school students. And one of the questions I had asked was, should we have an ethnic studies requirement in high school? And a lot of them said no, because they felt that was way too late, and that they wanted a much bigger emphasis, not waiting until high school, that they instead wanted to see it incorporated throughout, the entire pre-K, K through 12 experience. And that just, they were concerned that the idea of, hey, you're going to learn about diversity and you're going to learn about different cultures in high school, was a bit of a cop out, which I thought was it was a really surprising response, and but it was a really interesting standpoint.
Yeah, that's right.
So now I've heard on a personal level that you happen to have been quite the softball player.
Yes.
And so I don't want to put you in the middle of another big controversial issue, but I got to ask. I mean, you grew up in LA, you live in San Francisco. Dodgers, Giants, who's your baseball team?
Okay, so it's really funny because in the most recent World Series, people were very unhappy, right?
Right.
And I was celebrating. I had at the beginning of this baseball season, I don't know if you remember this, but opening day was going to be Giants versus Dodgers.
Yep.
We bought the tickets. We were ready to go. I was so excited. So to end with that, it was really like, hey, I get to celebrate this.
Yep.
But I'll add, because of my baseball interest, I've expanded to really seeing all of the stadiums across the country, and I've now fallen in love with different ones. And once I heard about the Chavez Ravine history of Dodger Stadium, it really felt like, I don't know if I can truly support this team, but I think sports just have a lot of issues around that anyway. So then I just decided I was a baseball fan, and I have different stadiums that I'm very fond of.
And so we could have been hanging out last year. So I've gone to every Giants opening day at AT&T. It's my I will admit, my boys may have had a couple excused absences to come with me to Giants opening day, which I truly believe should be a school holiday, national holiday. But yeah, that was one of the disappointing things. So I've always, and so I was born in DC, right across, and before the Nationals were there. So I grew up an Orioles fan, and I've never been. Have you made it to Camden yet? Because I've gone in the winter, and I was there. I was on a business trip. I stayed an extra day so I could go to a game at Camden against the Pirates, and I got rained out. So I've walked around the stadium. But how does Camden compare to Pac Bell? I still call it Pac Bell. They keep changing the name. I'm still calling it Pac Bell.
Well, it's so funny because I actually really admire God, what is it called now? Oracle Park.
I think it's Oracle. Yeah.
Where are we now? Yeah. I've always admired Oracle Park, but Camden Yards just has like that definite history of baseball, that like really old charm to it that you see all across the East Coast that I don't think compares.
Yeah. So what's still on the list of because I don't think you've made it to all the stadiums yet, right? What's at the top of the list once we can, you know, go visit baseball stadiums again? What's the top one that you still have to visit?
So I still have never been to Tampa Bay Rays Stadium,
Yep.
because it's one of those, if you go, it's really just for that, and it's kind of tricky. There's I've been to both in Texas. I haven't been. I've only seen where the Astros play, but I haven't been there to watch a game. So there's a couple in Texas, in Florida, and then I know a handful in the East Coast that I usually don't get to go to during the summer. So
Yeah.
I'm under 30. I mean, I have about 9 to go. Pretty sure that's where I'm at.
Okay. Well, that's something to look forward to.
Yes.
And I just want to say thank you. I mean, it is so obvious that you're such a committed advocate. And, you know, I know you're on one, you're making some huge sacrifices, and two, you're on the front lines battling for kids. And these are some really difficult issues. And I appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun. I know we've been trying to find a time for a while, so I appreciate that.
Of course, you've been busy. Thank you.
Thanks.